In 1947, India faced a staggering structural crisis. The newly independent nation needed to industrialize rapidly to pull millions out of poverty, but it lacked the basic machinery and physical infrastructure to do so. Planners looked at the two dominant global development models. On one side was the Soviet system of total state ownership. On the other, the free capitalist model, driven by private landlords and business owners. The National Planning Committee evaluated these paths and rejected both. The Soviet model risked a totalitarian state and the loss of democratic freedoms, while the capitalist model threatened severe exploitation of laborers and peasants in a deeply unequal society. The solution was a middle path based on democratic socialism. The state would build a massive public sector as the structural core of the economy, while allowing private enterprise to operate in the periphery. This was a deliberate architectural choice. It was a carefully engineered framework designed to force rapid industrial growth while preserving a democratic political system. Implementing this blueprint required central authority. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and the new government took active control over the economic environment, setting strict parameters. The state claimed exclusive ownership over the commanding heights of the economy. Defense, heavy and basic industries, public utilities, and finance were reserved entirely for the public sector, positioning the government as the primary engine of macroeconomic growth. Private business was restricted to areas like agriculture and small-scale industries. Even there, private firms had to operate within strict regulatory limits, and the state retained the explicit right to intervene if a company exhibited monopolistic behavior against the national interest. To orchestrate the system, the government established the Planning Commission in 1950. This body was tasked with auditing the nation's physical and human resources to formulate structured 5-year plans. Rather than leaving development to the immediate forces of the free market, the government consciously chose to direct long-term capital formation itself. Before any heavy industrialization could begin, the state had to address immediate survival. In 1951, the country faced severe food shortages and spiraling inflation. The first 5-year plan prioritized agricultural self-sufficiency. Planners directed resources into massive irrigation projects to rapidly boost crop yields. The strategy worked. By 1956, the country had reduced its food grain imports to just 500,000 tons, effectively stabilizing the national price level. Securing base-level survival and controlling inflation provided the stable macroeconomic climate required to launch a highly ambitious industrial agenda. With food production stabilized, the second 5-year plan launched in 1956. Guided by Prime Minister Nehru and Professor P.C. Mahalanobis, the state adopted a heavy industry model based on the experience of the Soviet Union. The logic was straightforward. To achieve long-term self-reliance, the nation needed a massive domestic capital goods sector. Resources were poured into the heavy production of coal, electricity, and steel. This was driven by the necessity of import substitution. Rather than buying essential heavy machinery from foreign producers, the state aimed to manufacture those producer goods domestically to accelerate its own internal capital formation. Executing this required accumulating massive amounts of capital and expanding heavy industry at an extreme pace, a process directed entirely by the state apparatus. By prioritizing steel plants and coal mines over consumer goods factories, the nation actively delayed immediate public comforts to forge long-term independent structural power. Over the next 40 years, this directed approach yielded tangible physical outcomes. Entirely new industrial sectors sprang up: petroleum refining, fertilizers, and machine tools. The massive scale of these new state-owned operations modernized an economy that had been stagnant and highly dependent prior to independence. To manage this diversified industrial base, the country required trained scientific personnel. By the 1990s, the state had cultivated one of the world's largest pools of technical and managerial manpower. The success of import substitution was visible in trade data. The composition of exports shifted away from raw materials and heavily in favor of domestically manufactured engineering goods. The state had successfully brute-forced physical modernization. However, it had also constructed an incredibly rigid economic machine that was rapidly approaching its operational limits. By 1990, the public sector enterprises designed to be the engine of growth were suffocating. None were showing exceptionally low rates of return or outright losses, bogged down by excessive regulatory mechanisms. In 1991, the newly installed government, led by P.V. Narasimha Rao, initiated a drastic pivot in economic policy. The new strategy relied on privatization and globalization. The state abolished the ceiling limits on assets prescribed by the MRTP Act, allowing domestic business houses to invest freely, and removed long-standing restrictions on foreign direct investment. Areas previously reserved exclusively for the public sector were open to private enterprise. The economy rapidly integrated with the world market, shifting immense economic activity away from state planners and into the hands of private capital. The government inverted its own mandate. It retreated from industrial production, allowing global market forces to take the wheel. The eighth five-year plan showed GDP growth accelerating to over 6% and forex reserves hitting a record $21 billion. But social metrics faltered. Inflation rose 11.6%, squeezing households. Employment lagged, and the number of people below the poverty line did not decline. With wealth concentrating in the private sector, the state redefined its role. Instead of building heavy industry, it shifted its focus to social infrastructure, deploying resources into education, healthcare, and public distribution systems to catch those failing in the new market economy. The reforms succeeded in accelerating growth and modernizing the national balance sheet. Yet they laid bare an enduring tension, the friction between explosive, market-driven wealth creation and the constitutional promise of broad social equity.